Prynhawn pawb a chroeso gynnes iawn I chi gyd. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our drill webinar. I'm just going to the third in our series of 5 webinars, and today we're particularly looking at the experience of disabled graduates. So very glad that you can all join us today for our hour-long event. We've got another sellout on our hands with this webinar. As mentioned, it's the third in our series. And I'd just like to go through a few housekeeping notices while we're all kind of getting settled in. We do have a speech-to-text service delivered by Hilary today, who's doing the Palantype. So we're posting the link in the Zoom chat box if anybody needs this. So do feel free to click on that link. We will keep all participants on mute for accessibility reasons, but do feel free to type questions or comments in the chat box ready for our question and answer session. And we will be sending copies of the speakers' reports and toolkits to everyone via email tomorrow, so you don't need to take furious notes. And in the email, we'll also send out a short evaluation form, and we'd be really grateful if you could complete this for us, and in particular, it makes our funders very happy. So welcome again to everybody. So today, we're going to hear from 2 co-produced research projects that received DRILL funding. If you haven't come across the DRILL programme before, it stands for Disability Research on Independent Living and Learning. It was a 5-year, £5 million project funded by the National Lottery Community Fund. It's a UK-wide, UK-wide scheme, and which funded 36 co-produced projects in total. Which has placed disabled people in the lead to influence policy and practice. Many of these projects have focused on employment-related issues. And for more information about DRILL, do have a look at our DRILL website, and we'll be posting the link to that in the chat box. We're planning a DRILL End of Project 4Nation virtual summit, and details of this event will be advertised on DW's social media once the date is confirmed. You'll be able to find a subtitled recording of our December webinar, which focused on the DRILL Ethics Committee on DW's YouTube account. You can follow DW on Facebook or Twitter at Disability Wales. And just to mention our membership of DW is free for all disabled people, and details can be found on our website. The link will be posted in the chat box. So that's all the housekeeping stuff. To give an outline of our event today, we'll be hearing from 2 of our DRILL funded projects, the barriers to employment for people with sickle cell disease, and Legally Disabled, the career experiences of disabled people in the law profession. Then we'll be hearing from 2 graduates based in Wales about the realities of gaining work experience and transitioning from university to employment as a disabled person. Once we've heard from those 4 presentations, there'll be opportunity for questions to our speakers via the chat box. And then to conclude, we'll be hearing from Helen Mary Jones, Senate member and Shadow Minister for Economy, Transport and Tackling Poverty, who will be offering us some concluding thoughts to end today's webinar. And as mentioned, we'll be sending out the reports and toolkits as mentioned by our speakers via email. So, without more ado, we'll start by watching a short introductory video recorded by Professor Simon Dyson, which will introduce us to the project Barriers to Employment for People with Sickle Cell Disease. Thank you, Megan.
Hello. Our project was entitled Barriers and Enablers to Employment, Black Disabled Peoples Living with Sickle Cell Disorders. Our team is made up of people living with sickle cell, non-governmental agencies for sickle cell, and university academics. Sickle cell disorders affect all ethnic groups, but especially black communities. Sickle cell itself is complex. Sometimes it operates like an acute illness, acute pain needing treatment with morphine-strength drugs, or extreme vulnerability to infections. Sometimes sickle cell is like a chronic illness. It involves both chronic pain and chronic fatigue. Sometimes it's like a disability. It may involve visual impairments, necrosis of the hips, or leg ulcers that last for years. And sometimes people with sickle cell disorders have other complicating conditions, such as diabetes, asthma, chronic kidney failure, or depression. Sickle cell is also highly variable, both between people and within the same person over time. But most people living with sickle cell on most days will look and feel perfectly well to outside people. Our project held 2 focus group discussions, 47 in-depth interviews with people with sickle cell, 2 policy development workshops where people with sickle cell came together to discuss how to advance policy, and we co-wrote a guide to sickle cell work and employment, including our idea of a workers' individual support plan. Before we talk about employment, just to note that people with sickle cell undertake a huge amount of unpaid work, care work, household work, voluntary work, community work, and sickle cell support work, all real work that is often not acknowledged. Sometimes we say, or we ask ourselves, are we living to work or are we working to live? People with sickle cell are doing neither. They are working to work. They're having to work so hard in self-care just to make themselves available for employment. They work when in pain, when on painkillers, when in hospital. They use annual leave for sick leave or for medical appointments. They have to strictly avoid alcohol, parties, late nights, holidays, the things that we enjoy beyond the world of work and employment. The remaining slide states the challenge on the left column and possible solutions in the right-hand column. For example, people with sickle cell say that they lack support at school, college or university to make the most of their abilities. Some of our previous university research produced a guide to sickle cell and school policy, which can be used in this respect. With the best will in the world, there are some times when people with sickle cell cannot work. To address this, a welfare benefits advisor helped us with advice on personal independence payments forms, which we've included on our website under the tab Social Security. Our guide to sickle cell work and employment is also downloadable from that website. The guide addresses issues such as whether or not or how to disclose to the employer that you have sickle cell. People with sickle cell have problems with the work environment, with cold temperatures. Even in supermarkets, jobs near chillers or freezers or strict uniform policies that aren't adjusted are unsuitable for them. Our workers' individual support plan, mirroring the kind of individual education, health and care plans that support children with medical conditions at school, tries to address this. Vulnerability to infection and fatigue makes commuting on public transport challenging. Our guide contains sections on what we might think might be good practice on this issue. We also need a workers' individual support plan to help challenge HR policies on sickness absence monitoring and return to work interviews, both of which are discriminatory in themselves for people living with sickle cell. Our workers' individual support plan enables issues to be put on the table for resolution. In this example, we tried to show how sickle cell pain is on a scale between mild, moderate, severe and excruciating, and that there are potential strategies for keeping workers with sickle cell in the workplace even when they're in pain. In terms of disciplining or dismissal or harassment, we did not identify anything beyond generic strategies and resources, many of which are available through Disability Rights UK themselves. To conclude, our main practical output is the Guide to Sickle Cell Work and Employment, an open education resource which means that it can be freely copied or adapted by another disability activist group. And it incorporates what we think may be useful across other disability groups, namely a workers' individual support plan. And finally, our contact details and the URL of our website, http://sicklecellwork.dmu.ac.uk. Thank you for listening.
Oh, yes, sorry. So that was really, really helpful introduction to the barriers to employment experienced by people with sickle cell disease. I believe that the co-researchers, Professor Simon Dyson and Sade Graham, are attending today, and then they'll be available for the Q&A session shortly. So we're now going to hear from Professor Debbie Foster and Dr. Natasha Hurst, who will discuss some of the recommendations from their co-produced research, Legally Disabled. Thank you both.
Hello, just to introduce myself, I'm Professor Debbie Foster from Cardiff Business School, Cardiff University, and Natasha was a co-researcher on this drill-funded project with me, and we worked in partnership with the Lawyers with Disabilities Division of the Law Society, and that is a dedicated division within the Law Society representing disabled people who become solicitors, paralegals, not barristers, but we did include barristers in our actual research because we wanted to know whether people were put off pursuing certain routes into their career path because they were not made welcome, or because they felt that as a disabled person they didn't belong. We entitled it Legally Disabled ? And we were interested in looking at a profession to counter the kind of emphasis in social policy and government policy on getting disabled people into any work. We feel that that was a kind of low aspirational approach to getting disabled people into work. And so we wanted to look at a profession that was seen as one of the more elite professions. And we wanted to see whether disabled people were visible, because they're often regarded as litigants, but not as advocates. And what we found was that the legal profession actually did a lot of diversity and inclusion work, and it invested quite heavily in diversity and inclusion work, but predominantly in gender and race, some areas of sexuality, but nothing major on disability. So ours was the first real project looking at the career experiences of disabled people in the profession. And in mapping their experiences, we began with some focus groups. We moved on to 55 individual in-depth interviews, and then we had almost 300 responses from a survey. And we felt that what we picked up from their early experiences in the profession was if they'd had a good experience in education or at university, this was a foundation, a really good foundation for them getting confidence, self-advocacy skills. Their aspirations were much higher, and they had much higher expectations that the world would be more accessible to them. So having a positive educational experience was really, really important in our findings. And we also found that those that had an experience during childhood of a legal case that they got involved with, now this may have been through medical negligence, they had actually got access to contacts within the legal profession. And that led them to get involved in their case, get involved in the law, get involved in the idea of accessing justice. And many of those people went on into careers in either professional negligence or medical negligence or personal injury law. Now, there are sort of different routes into law that you can take. You can become a barrister, you can become a solicitor or a paralegal, and increasingly the legal profession is looking at ways in which people can study over time so that you don't have to have one commitment. The paralegal route was always like that. You could build modules that meant that you gained experience along the way and did bits of studying, but increasingly the legal profession as a whole is moving much more to a flexible approach. And I think that that benefits disabled people. But also we found that there were some areas of law, for example, we found barristers who might be probate lawyers. So a lot of their casework was actually incredibly flexible. Perhaps they didn't have to go into court very often. They could have a practice that they built themselves around their own impairment. And that meant that, you know, there was a lot more flexibility. Now, I mean, a lot of barristers are self-employed. Very few barristers are working for an organisation. They'll be self-employed. So they have a lot more autonomy. But at the same time, there can be a lot more prejudice, we found, at the bar than there is within the solicitors profession, because the bar didn't have an equivalent to the Lawyers with Disabilities Division, so they didn't have a special interest group representing them. I'm going to pass over to Natasha now to say a little bit more.
Thank you, Debbie. Yes, I'm Natasha. I was the co-researcher on the DRIL Legally Disabled project. I'm going to give you a really quick run through some of the findings in relation to young people who were in training and also graduates looking to get into the profession and progress their careers. I've got a really short space of time, but this is all in the resources that will be sent out to you tomorrow. There were a number of issues with recruitment and in particular recruitment agencies who were not very positive about disability and who did not give the level of support that graduates needed to recognise how they can showcase the skills and the talents that they have because they are disabled people, and a sense of confidence in being able to talk about those skills and to talk about their impairment and the support needs and reasonable adjustments that they might need from an employer. So confidence, we found, was a really key issue for graduates being able to have those conversations with employers and potential employers that secured them work experience and gave them access to getting into the profession in the first place. So that was all really quite important. Attitudes and barriers, and we found that sort of careers advice and the knowledge of the kind of solutions that are available to the barriers that disabled people face in their careers, that's really important. So being able to know what it is that you don't know when you're moving into a new work environment, or when you're thinking about what kind of adjustments might you need in a work experience placement or in a new job, for example. So being able to get in touch with Access to Work or any specialist advisors, disabled people's organisations, to find out what might actually be there to support you to reach your potential in the workplace. And the same applies to getting on in a career, moving on in your profession. It's having access to role models, disabled people who have been there and done that and are confident about sharing their stories and talking about it, and encouraging other people to be disability inclusive as well. Where do you get the information from about an employer if they don't put very much on their website? Are their offices accessible? Do they have good equal opportunities policies? Are they disability friendly, or is it all just a load of gloss? How do you get that conversation with a potential employer to find out whether they're really going to meet your needs in the workplace and be proactive? One of the things that we did find with the research is that it was pivotal in starting those conversations in a really constructive way across the profession, and all credit to the legal professions that they've taken this research and they've really run with it to try to be more disability inclusive, We've had lots of roundtables, lots of discussions with employers, discussions with disabled people across the profession. And that has all been really important, especially during COVID, because we're trying out really innovative ways of working remotely, online. We're proving that the barriers that employers have put in place before by saying, no, you can't work flexibly, you can't work remotely, that's all being thrown out. And now employers are recognising this can work. It's a benefit not just to disabled people, but the wider workforce as well. And the research has been really important in having those constructive conversations. In the guidance that kind of you'll be sent tomorrow, there's a link in there to a couple of personal profile videos. One of them is of a young man called Rob Cam, who talks about his experience of getting into the profession. So we do encourage you to have a look at that. And we look forward to the questions that you'll be asking as well in the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, wow, very succinct presentation. So thank you for that. So I can see some questions coming up in the chat box. So do keep them coming, comments and that. So we can have a really good discussion in a moment. But thank you to Natasha and Debbie for that excellent insight and sort of introduction to the research that they undertook. So before we do move on to questions and answers, I'd now like to introduce two recent graduates who have both undertaken a Go Wales supported work experience placement at Disability Wales. If you're not familiar with the Go Wales scheme, it's well worth having a look on their website for more details about how it works. We'll be putting the link in the chat box. Over the last 3 years, DW has hosted 11 Go Wales placements, with most of these being disabled students. The scheme has enabled us to support the next generation of disabled graduates. And for more information about the placements we offer, we've recently produced a video about these, and that's available on our YouTube channel. And again, we'll be putting the link to that in the chat box. So yeah, do have a look and see some familiar faces, as well as there's quite a few shots of our office in the days when we were all working in there. It's feels quite strange to look at it now, but I'm sure we'll be back there soon. So I'm really delighted to welcome Cardiff University PhD student Felix Shi. Felix was our first ever Go Wales student, so he was our pioneer and has continued to be involved with us as a volunteer in various capacities. So Felix is going to discuss his experiences. Thank you, Felix.
Thank you, Rhian. I didn't know I was one of the first candidates to work with Disability Wales, but as an international student, I came from China, so I can share with you sort of the experience I got in my undergraduate university, which I did in China, and my postgraduate in the UK. So back in China, we didn't have that much so-called in-education support to support disabled disabled students to try out their experience in employment before the graduation. So this was very difficult for me to find experience to expand my practical skills in employment. So until I started my PhD in Cardiff Business School with Professor David Foster, and I came across the opportunity via Go Wales to do the partnership with Disability Wales as a research assistant. So I found it was really helpful in terms of linking my knowledge and skills towards the real world advocacy practices. So I would really suggesting students, especially students in undergraduate, they would really be benefited to work with those pioneer organizations such as Disability Wales in order to expand their network, but also practicing skills that they cannot get in university. And I would like to speak a little bit about my research as well. So I'm working with Professor Debbie Foster in terms of understanding the social economic transition in society and its impact on industrial relations on disabled people. So I found the situation in the UK that you have such a wide network of disability rights groups in order to coordinate or co-produce some research outcomes and helping and supporting each other in terms of expanding the network for potential opportunities for employment. So I would really encourage if you're students in the university to go out and get in touch with Go Wales or other pioneer organizations to expand your experience in employment. That would really help with your potential employability in the future. So thank you, Rian. That's for me.
Thank you, Felix. That was great. Now I'd like to introduce and welcome Leandra Crane, who's actually who was one of our Go Wales students on placement and has recently taken up a role with us. And so Leandra's going to talk about her experiences of university to employment transitions. Thank you, Leandra.
Thank you, Rian. So as Rian was just saying, I'm Leandra and I graduated July 2020, so just this year, with my master's degree in astrophysics. And I'm going to want to talk to you about my experiences with employment services at university and other opportunities I had whilst there. So when you're at university, there are a lot of events run and lots of support available for students. However, a lot of the events aren't exactly disability friendly, and I found some of them inaccessible. So the biggest example I can think of is the career fairs, because career fairs for me are sensory hell, I would describe them. They are overly busy. There is so much noise around you, and it's also just really disorienting with all of these things going on, which made it really hard and really anxiety inducing and exhausting to try and talk to employers while managing all of that, which made it really difficult for me to get something out of those discussions with employers. But I have also had some really good events at university. One of them was the Conference for Undergraduate Women in Physics, which was held at Oxford University. I went in my first year and it was amazing. It's a really contested spot because they only had about 100 spaces, and all undergraduate women in physics at university at that time were encouraged to apply. While there, we got to listen to renowned physicists who told us from how they started off doing their bachelor's and then moving on their own career path, be it by going straight to a PhD and then going into employment, or going into employment and then doing their PhD whilst working, which was really interesting. And it was really nice to hear that they had come from a place where they had the same doubts and the same worries that I did at that point in my education. And I think it would be really amazing if this sort of event could be done for the disabled student population, because I think that would go a very long way for helping disabled students to see their worth and to see how to get to places and to see that it's possible, in the exact same way that it did for the female undergraduate physicists that went to that event. And if it was online, that would be even better because more people could attend. So another event I went to was an optional employability event in my second year. This was run by my department. It was really interesting. They had some alumni there talking, they had employers talking, they had pub quizzes with the lecturers and team building skills with my peers, which was great. Apart from major accessibility issues, it was in the middle of nowhere in Newtown. There was no signal and intermittent Wi-Fi, which meant I couldn't contact my external support. There were no lifts, and my ensuite room that I requested was in a separate building up a really steep flight of stairs, and it was a little bit of a mess. In terms of accessibility, there were some improvements, definitely, I think, for future years, and they made sure to tell future students about some of the issues, but they also didn't change site, which was a bit disappointing, considering most of the issues were to do with the site. But also something I found quite common is that student support at university is generally amazing, and they work really hard to make sure everything is accessible. But where the issues come from is resistance from the departments. And that's not just me, that's other students I've noticed as well. And I think this can be quite disheartening for students when they're looking at wanting to go into future work, into the profession that they are in, and going, is this going to be what all employers are like from this profession? And I think that can knock some people's confidence. In my first year as well, I had an experience where I applied for a job, I put all my accessibility stuff in, and then I wasn't really offered any events, which was also a little bit disheartening and made me a bit more guarded about talking about accessibility. But the main thing I wanted to talk about is Go Wales. As Rhian said, I was able to go and work with Disability Wales for about 4 weeks, nearly 2 years ago now. And it was amazing. And the reason I got to go was because I had this amazing Go Wales caseworker who managed to arrange for a hotel and travel refunds and food refunds so that I could stay in the centre of Cardiff for 4 weeks and travel to Caerphilly every day to work with them. And it would not have been possible physically or economically for me to do so otherwise. And thanks to that experience, I was able to get known by Disability Wales, work with them, and then have an opportunity to work with them. And I don't think it would have been possible at all without that Go Wales experience. So as Felix was saying, more people should know about Go Wales, more people should be getting involved with them, DPOs should be more involved and know about them more specifically, and more disabled students should realise the kind of support they can get through Go Wales so that they can access such amazing experience that is actually adapted for them, and to see where they can take it to, because this is a completely different career path than what I was originally on, but I'm so much happier and so much more passionate about it. But that's all I really wanted to talk about. So thank you very much. I'll hand it back to Rhian.
Thank you, Leandra. That's fab. And yeah, we remembered your when you were on placement with us, your tales of being in a Cardiff hotel, which was quite interesting. But there we are. That's another story. Okay, so we've heard from our wonderful speakers and experiences and the different research. So all our speakers are still here to take your questions. So we've got Simon and Sade from the who talked earlier about the employment experiences for people with sickle cell disease. We've got Natasha and Debbie on legally disabled, and we've still got Felix and Leandra. So I can see there's been quite a number of questions and comments come up in the chat box. I noticed there was one that was about Go Wales, because the upper age limit is 25. And that's because it is apparently because of the particular European ESF funding criteria. But it does seem that there is a gap for similar schemes in the over 25 age group. Although I noticed that there's a comment in the chat box that Leonard Cheshire's programme, Can Do project, might be another opportunity. Quite a few comments about around education, about the importance of early good positive experiences in education at the schools level that would actually then, supports people's aspirations going forward, and also the need for good work experience placements at school for disabled students. So would any of our panel like to comment on any of those points? And then I can check the chat box for further things. So Debbie, please. Thank you.
Yes, on the issue of work experience, this was really important in the legal sector. And we also found that if disabled people could secure work experience, then it was kind of a safe space for employers to explore with them, you know, the sorts of reasonable adjustments that they needed if they were to take them on in the future in an environment where, because we often found employers were willing and happy and sort of wanting to come forward to employ disabled people, but then they were scared. And if you sort of probed a bit deeper, what are you scared of? Well, they're scared of asking the wrong questions. They're scared of getting the language wrong. They're scared of offending somebody. And a lot of people did say that work experience then allowed them to educate. I know we shouldn't have to, but to some extent, educate the employer in an environment where they weren't in a formal employment contract. And if they got it wrong, it didn't really matter that much. And the employer didn't feel as defensive about getting it wrong either and asking questions. So I think that work experience space is really, really important. And, you know, I think if we can create more opportunities for people to have short periods of work experience, although, like I say, we shouldn't have to educate the employers, it does help understand the different barriers that people face.
Thank you, Debbie. I think that's really helpful. Any further comments from any of the panel?
Yeah.
Sade, thank you.
I'm Sade. I just wanted to kind of expand a bit more about the work experience. So I am a clinical pharmacist by profession. So I work within the NHS in hospitals, and I've worked in the community as well. But when I was transitioning from university to full-time employment, it was important that I had conversations with different types of employers through work experience. So I knew what my work rights were as a disabled employee coming in. Like, it gave me the knowledge of what I can and can't ask for, what's available. So if you don't have those like experiences, then it's hard for the employer to work with you because you don't know what you want. Initially, when I first started working, when I was like 15, I didn't disclose. I said I had sickle cell, but they didn't know what that meant. And I didn't really know what that meant to them either. Did they just need to know it for emergency in case something happened at work? And it wasn't until I was 5 years into the role that it came up that they could have done so many more adjustments, or I could have asked for so many other things to make my life easier. So I think it's very important that we find work experience placements for people living with disabilities. And we also take advantage of, I don't know if it's in every sector, but within the NHS, when you apply for a role, it does say, if you have a disability, do you want to be considered for the guaranteed interview scheme? And that in itself, you can select yes or no. I always select yes, because I just feel like, well, if I can get in an interview and discuss more about my disability and how it affects me personally, and get rid of their misconceptions or anything that they might think about that may be incorrect, then it kind of gets you through the door and helps you have those conversations from before you are in a contract. So yeah, that's my experience with that.
I think that's a really good point, Sade, because I know what we found with the students that we've hosted, and in fact, actually, when people first join us as employees, because we're a disabled people's organisation, so in most of our roles, we specifically, recruit disabled people to the roles because they're front facing, they're representative of us as a DPO, and we're all often staggered by the fact that, particularly for people who've gone through kind of schooling and university, have not had any introduction to what their rights are and what they're entitled to. So, so obviously when people come to us, we're able to, because we're solution focused, we're able to say, oh, are you aware of access to work? Are you aware of this? Are you aware of that? Have you thought, and so, what we hope then is that once students or other, employees, move on for us, they take that knowledge and it's like empowering, and I can actually go to the next employer saying, these are access issues I encounter, but this is how we can overcome them. This is how we address them. So I think that's just so important. So I can see that the comments are coming thick and fast. So there was quite an interesting one about class, about the impact of class and disability, whether there's a factor. I don't know, Natasha, like to respond to that one?
Yeah, this did come up in the legally disabled research, and it's a really interesting one. So when we were talking about young people who did well getting into the profession, those who had maybe had a medical negligence or personal injury case, it wasn't just the contact with the profession that helped them, it was the resources that came with it as a result of the settlement. So if, for example, you're disabled, but you also don't have the personal resources to have accessible transport in place to get in and out of work every day, or you don't have the resources to make sure that, for example, all of your personal care needs are met, if you don't live in accessible accommodation, all of these factors are going to build up and work against you, drain your energy, reduce the opportunities that you have for getting a job or getting to work and back and performing to the best of your ability once you're at work. So class definitely does cut across, as do the resources that people have on a day-to-day basis. If you get rid of all of those barriers outside of work, you can just focus on work, but that's often not the case for people.
Yes, I think, resources, and, is the, so it's the resources and the knowledge, so Debbie, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's also been an established issue within the legal profession of class giving you a bit of a leg up in the legal profession, simply because you have the social contacts, or you've got members of your family, or you've got parents. I think there was a piece of research done at Bristol University that said that 70% of newly qualified solicitors had one parent that was in the legal profession already. And, buying your way into that kind of social network and that cultural capital. But a lot of law firms, the big law firms in London, are aware of this and have been running schemes for many years, looking at class barriers. What they haven't really been doing is looking at barriers for disabled people. And we've been encouraging more and more of the city firms to get involved in those sorts of projects, because I think a lot of it is about actually, going to some of these big buildings in London, and they're really, really intimidating. And, seeing the atmosphere in which you would work in and mixing with the people and actually realizing that they're just like you and me. But, it's that glorification of the profession that you have to get over to some extent. So people are put off it.
I think that's a really good point. I can see that Professor Simon Dyson has suggested added in the comment box that they suggested that a worker's individual support plan could. Oh, sorry, it's just the chat has rolled down. I don't know, Simon, are you there, or could Sade talk about the employment support plan?
I don't mind talking about it.
Oh, Sade, go on. Thank you.
The individual support plan is at the end of the Sickle Cell and Employment Guide, and it is a personalised plan that you work with the employee and the employer, and it lists like your condition, what issues you might have with access or mobility, what your condition looks like on a good day and what it looks like when it's getting worse, and the things that you both have agreed to have in place, and that includes like things medically. So if you might need who your emergency contact is, and what happens if you fall ill at work. I have sickle cell, so sometimes it means that I could be fall ill at work and need to be taken by an ambulance, or sometimes it's just I need to go home. So that having that plan, I mean, with my past two employers, has been really beneficial. It helps my manager know the steps to take, and kind of gives them a guide of what should be happening around HR and return to work and when they would expect me to be back at work. And it's updated regularly. So as if anything changes with your mobility or your access, it's updated and you both sit down and go over it. So it gives both of you the opportunity to really get an understanding of your needs and the needs of your employer as well, because I think sometimes you have to remember that obviously employers want a job done and they have their own performance indicators to meet as well. And it's about how we can both work together to ensure that it is done, but our needs are also taken care of. So that individual support plan can be adapted to any condition and to any disability. And it's a really useful tool that you can take around from employer to employer, and it kind of like breaks the ice. So it doesn't seem as scary if it's a condition that people may or may not have heard of or don't have any understanding. They at least know how to work with you to get the best from both sides. So that's a bit more about that.
Oh, thank you. And I think what strikes me with what you said there is about the need for open conversations between employees and managers. And I think one of the things we certainly advocate in Disability Wales is the need for disability equality training for employers at all levels to be able to, understand the barriers that, people that many of their, because in Wales, 23% of the population is disabled. So actually most workplaces will have staff who are disabled. May not always be obvious. And in fact, one of the things from the lockdown is that many people, sort of ended up on the shielding list, actually had not actually realised they were disabled because often they had hidden impairments like diabetes, for example, or I guess sickle cell, things like that. So I don't know, any of the panel would like to comment about the training needs for managers, and employers?
Perhaps I could say something.
Simon, yes, please.
Yeah. I mean, we've spoken about employers and employees, but there is a role for government in this, which is that the nature of sickle cell is that even with the best supports, people may be periodically ill on quite a regular or unpredictable basis. And something I wished we'd pushed harder for in kind of writing up the project was the idea that government should underwrite 25% of a person with sickle cell's wages so that employers weren't disadvantaged by taking on someone who, even in the best circumstances, might be periodically ill. And of course, the argument going back 18 months would have been, oh, we can't afford that kind of thing, only to see with COVID, the entire country being offered a similar level of support. So that's something that I wish we'd pushed for much more strongly, and does remind us that there is a level beyond the employer that needs to be activated to, truly support disabled people in employment.
Thank you, Simon. And you've also cued me in very well to introduce our concluding speaker. Delighted to be joined today by Helen Mary Jones, Senedd member for Mid and West Wales, but also Plaid Cymru Shadow Minister for the Economy, Transport and Tackling Poverty. And Helen Mary, I think you've recently published a report as well about the economy post-COVID, so it's particularly timely that you're here with us this afternoon. So I think, Helen, you're going to respond with your thoughts and comments from what you've heard this afternoon. Thank you, Helen. Diolch.
Diolch yn fawr, Rhian. Wy'n cymryd bod ni'n heb cyfieithu, felly na I siarad yn Saesneg. I'm assuming we haven't got translation available today, so I'll make my comments in English. I'm also, as well as the Shadow Minister for the Economy, I have until recently been speaking for my party on post-16 education while one of my colleagues was on maternity leave, and I'm also the chair of the cross-party group on human rights. So this was I was really pleased to get the invitation to participate in this event. I've had a long association with Disability Wales and with disability issues, going back into the 1990s when I was the Deputy Director of the Equal Opportunities Commission in Wales. And I suppose one of the things that I was not surprised to hear today, but perhaps it's a bit disappointing that we're still having to have some of these conversations. You know, we think we've moved forward, and then we find that we slip back. And one of the things that I think is so good about the Drill project is the way that it provides hard evidence of what hasn't changed and what needs to change. Because in a time when resources are going to be even tighter perhaps than they have been, and you know, Samuel was right to refer to the fact we've suddenly found the magic money tree. Well, I think we can be fairly sure when COVID comes to an end, certainly there'll be some people in public life who want to turn that money tap off, and the kind of evidence that this work develops shows the need for further action. It also makes them, I was struck in all the presentations about, you know, practical ideas about things that can change. I think the workers' support plan that you can take from one place to another, it's quite a simple idea, but like many of the best ideas, I was sitting here thinking, well, why have we never thought of that before? It's a kind of completely sensible thing to do, and that brings on to something that I wanted to say about the ongoing stigma and shifting language, and how I think it was Vin in the chat said, can we stop talking about disclosing when we talk about an impairment? Because that's what you do when you've got a previous criminal conviction and you have to tell your employer that. And we shouldn't still be using that language, and yet it persists, and it feeds into that sort of old narrative about disability being the person is disabled and they are a problem, rather than this workplace doesn't work well for these people with these impairments, and what can we do to change it? And sometimes when I talk to colleagues about language, they don't always understand how important it is. But language informs thought, and thought informs policy and practice and how we conduct ourselves. And I think we need to think again about this, how deep that issue of stigma runs. And you know, we've done a lot of thinking in the Senedd recently about equality issues around race. We talk all the time about equality issues around sex, though I'd argue we don't always do very well in terms of how we promote justice between women and men, but at least we talk about it. We don't talk in politics in Wales very much about disability, you know. And I can think of colleagues of mine over the sort of 20 odd years, I haven't been a politician all that time, I've been in and out, but who have had impairments and who have had to have adaptations made for them to be able to work effectively as politicians. But very few of them have chosen to speak about it. And I have a sort of slight kind of sympathy for that, because Rhian knows that I'm quite profoundly dyslexic, and and I don't regard that as a disability in the same sort of way as the issues we're talking about today. But it took me a very long time to talk about that, because I was afraid of how that would make people perceive me. And I think one of the messages that I'm taking from today is the importance of people who have achieved, and this comes on, I want to talk about work experience in a minute, actually being open about the challenges and barriers that they've faced. And I don't know why in the early stages of my career in public life, it was easier for me to talk about the sex discrimination I'd faced and the issues that were there for me as a single mother in public life. But it took a lot longer for me to talk openly about my dyslexia and the adjustments I'd had to make for that. So I think that there are some issues around that I want to take back into the political community in Wales and ask people and see if we can support people to be more open, because then, and coming back to young people, if they see the person with this impairment doing this role, it can really shift. And that comes back to the importance of role models, I think, came up in the discussion about the legal profession. I'm really pleased to hear that you've had positive responses from the legal profession to this. But I'm an old-fashioned feminist, and like the suffragettes said, it's deeds, not words for me. And Debbie's right to say that the legal profession has been talking about class for a very long time. What they've actually done about it is you know, and that brings me on to some thoughts about the need for affirmative action too. But I was really struck by what people said about work experience and how that provides you not only with skills, with confidence, But that access to networks, and the point that people have made about that's then compounded if you're a working class disabled young person, if you're a black person or a person of color, if there are other intersectional challenges that you face. But those issues of resources, those are things that I think we need to address at a public level in Wales, because of course, we know we're losing European funding. We don't know what will come in its place. And the next Welsh Government will have to make some really serious decisions about where it makes its investment. And I think ensuring that young disabled people have got opportunities to access some of those opportunities at a really early stage in their career is going to be really important. I mean, something else that's current is we are going to be passing the legislation on a new curriculum for Wales, and I was very struck by what several speakers said about young people just not knowing what their rights are or what support is available for them to access. And again, a takeaway from this from me from today, these are not issues you'd need to put on the face of the bill, but they need to go into the guidance, and we need to make sure that when we're talking about young people's rights, we don't just focus on the Rights of Children and Young Persons measure and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, but the whole range of rights. And that's something I want to take back to the human rights cross-party group, because there may be some things after the election that we can do on that. Rhian mentioned my paper about looking about what should the Welsh economy be for? What do we want it to do? And we came to the conclusion that it's about creating enough wealth so we can have good public services. But it's not just about creating wealth, it's about sharing it and about making sure that people who historically, either as individuals or because they're part of a group with protected characteristics or because of where they live geographically, haven't had access to those opportunities. And it's also about, decarbonising our economy and making sure that that we don't leave our planet worse for the generation of young people coming through than it is now. And so some of the things that I've learned today really help me with that agenda, because as Rhian's pointed out, 23% of people in Wales live with an impairment of some kind. That's a quarter of the population. And we know that most of those people are not making the contribution that they could be economically. Now, when we talk about the economy very often about building back better. Well, better than what? I don't want to build back better. I don't want to build back better than a country where a quarter of its children live in poverty. I think we need to talk about building back well. And where I do agree about what we've learned from COVID is that if we spend public money right and if we spend it well, we can open up opportunities for people. And that isn't just of benefit to those individuals, because for me, if Wales is going to be the country we all want to live in, then everybody's got to have the opportunity to use their skills, use their talents, follow their interests, find, as Leandra said, that the road you started down might not be the road you want to follow, and you might want to go off and do something else, and you ought to be able to retrain to do that if that's what you want to do. But it's also about the national waste, the waste to Wales, the waste to our economy, the lack of opportunities for employers. I remember Rhian showing me some research a very long time ago that showed that when employers did employ disabled people, they got very good employees, because those people were often very committed. They'd had to work hard to get to where they were, a bit like if you employ mothers with children. They don't actually take more time off if they can possibly avoid it. They take less. And I think that it's that loss of opportunities for individuals is really important, but it's also that waste of talent that's bad for employers because they're missing a trick with some really good people they could be employing, but also from my point of view, bad for our country. We can't carry on with 23% of our potential talent not being properly used. What a waste. Thank you all very much for today. I've learnt a lot. I always do in these conversations, and I've got some things that I'll want to take away and work on. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi.
Oh, thank you so much, Helen Mary. And as one of I can see people clapping and cheering. And as one of our commentators in the box has said, great to hear you role modelling and sharing your own experience around dyslexia. That means a huge amount to many. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll be knocking on your door again with some of the following up on some of these points. So thank you to Helen Mary, diolch yn fawr iawn, and thank you to all our speakers. We're virtually out of time. So thank you to Debbie and Natasha on Legally Disabled, to Simon and Sade on the Sickle Cell Project, as well as, of course, Leandra and Felix. We will be sending out all the documents to you by email. Follow us on social media to find out what we're doing next, including further webinars, and also do join DW. So thank you all very much for your participation and attention today, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. Hold now. Bye-bye.